This is an SM Media production.
Hello folks and welcome to the debut episode of Chronicle, the Rangers Journey. I'm Scott McPike. It's an absolute pleasure to be your host in this new show on the channel. This show is going to be a bit of a different one to what we do usually on the channel. We are going into the documentary levels of what we do in the channel, and this is the place to start. We are starting by looking at what happened when David Murray took over Rangers in 1988. All the way to when Steven Gerrard lifted the 55th title for Rangers in 2021. Every Rangers fan who was around about that time will have went through every emotion, but to learn about why there was so many big journeys in that time, you need to look back. You need to look back to why a man like David Murray was needed and why that revolution was required. And we are going back 10 years from when David Murray took over to 1978 to learn about why this period was required. Joining me in the debut episode of the Rangers Journey is a Rangers fan who's been through it all. He's been through every emotion and he remembers this time very well, from 78 to 86. The one and only Alan Bradley. Alan, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the debut episode of the Rangers Journey. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks very much, Scott. I'm looking forward to, hopefully I'll add some value anyway, but no, it's an amazing story anyway, and as you say, it's really good to kind of go back and just kind of revisit some of those, and as you say, look at how ultimately it'll link up to what's going to be the revolution further down the line.
Yeah. Obviously the revolution takes off in 86, which is the next period we'll cover in this journey, but I think to fully understand why modernisation and progression was needed at the club, you need to look back to this time in 1978. Where are Rangers in 1978? Rangers are coming off a treble under Jock Wallace. They've ended the dominance of Celtic, and it was dominance, nine championships in a row, a European Cup and several silverware under Jock Stein. Another Jock was the man leading Rangers at the time, Jock Wallace, but out of the blue in 78, enough's enough. He leaves the club under a cloud. It's fair to say. I think there's I don't think we'll ever know the full details of what happened. There's been speculation over the years that it was down to money. Like Wallace wasn't getting paid the same as half the managers and the teams in the Scottish League. You've got the influence of Willie Waddle, who was obviously his predecessor. He was still at the club as general manager. Alan, that whole Jock Wallace leaving in 1978, first, before we talk about what we think happened, like, what had Jock Wallace done for Rangers in that period when he took over, and obviously coming off the back of a European Cup Winners' Cup under Waddle, stopping that dominance of Celtic as well? It was a tough ask for him to do that.
Yeah, it was. And I think on the record as well, we'll get on to Big Greig further down the line too. I've got to put my kind of hand up as well and say, as far as I'm concerned, between Greig and Wallace, they were just my heroes.
Yeah.
Big Greig in terms of the greatest ever footballer, obviously, we'll get on to it. But Jock Wallace, what he did, as you say, he came in there pretty quietly as well, didn't he, from kind of Hearts, ultimately to, be assistant to Waddle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he played a good part as well in terms of the kind of bonding of the team and so on, whereas Willie Waddle was far better in terms of the standards and discipline and really the tactics away in Europe. But when Big Jock actually took over, it did really well during that period. I think we would then go on and win the Scottish Cup final against Celtic Centenary one, which was great. Greatest moment in my life was actually winning the league up at Easter Road when Big Stein equalises. And again, as a kid who had watched the 9 in a row, it wasn't even a case of stopping Celtic, but for me to actually see Rangers winning a league title was magnificent. Some of the performances as well that he had as well, it was just so good. We then after that, we then ultimately go on and we'll win the treble too, which was amazing. We then have a kind of iffy year where it just all went a bit pear-shaped, but then again, back again, second treble. So for me, what he did, and I think during the times where I think he won 8 trophies with Big Wallace the helm, he actually made a surplus as well in terms of transfer. So it wasn't as if he was kind of throwing loads away. You mentioned it too with Willie Waddle, because obviously the priority after the disaster as well was how can we get things in terms of the park, and that'll impact further down the line, obviously, on
absolutely
transfer budgets. But no, to me, Jock Wallace, just the greatest. Both him and Greig just typified, I don't know, just everything about that whole Rangers spirit.
Yeah, and obviously it ends in a cloud in '78. Obviously, after a treble winning season with, we'll never know what happened, but it's just a weird one, isn't it? There's so many. You would never. It's just something you'd never expect. A treble win and you lose your manager,
and I think he'd also signed a new contract. I read him saying about a 2-year contract, or a couple of weeks before he'd signed a contract again on it. As you say, he all went on the record as well to say he would never talk about it. But yeah, one school I thought was obviously money wise. I think he was in 12 grand at the time, Scott, which obviously I think even. I'm trying to think. I think Billy McNeil was even in more too. There were a couple of other managers. So I think he felt through that period of time as well. Obviously, he was wanting an increase in salary, but as I say, that didn't seem to be the reason. There had been some approaches from other clubs as well before that period of time as well. But obviously, Big Jock had stayed on. Other one too, as you said, was Willie Waddle. Willie Waddle was pretty much in his hands, kind of running everything. And it's quite funny that once Big Wallace goes down to Leicester, one of the positives he took from it was it actually allowed me not just to touch on the football, but to look at, commercials. So never know, but it totally came out of the blue. I don't even think there was any kind of rumours up to then. Yeah.
No, there was nothing at all. And obviously the search for a replacement goes on, and it's when you read at it, it only ever seems to be John Greig. Like there's even talk in John Greig's book that he knows he tells his partner of the time that he thinks he's getting the job. He thinks he's going to get asked to be the manager. Was it always Greig? Was that the only name mentioned, or was there anybody else? We'll touch on this in a few years later when Greig leaves, but was there ever any chat about anybody other than Greig at that point?
Certainly myself, guys in the supporters bus and my family and so on, there was no chat at all. It was just a case of, Wallace is gone, and then obviously Big Greig was announced. The other thing as well with Wallace I picked up too is he actually went on the record and said he had been to the board as well, and he had said to them he had felt unsettled for a period of time leading up to that one. But again, Scott, that didn't come out to away after the event.
The thing of the time, obviously, with managers was doing an apprenticeship elsewhere to earn your stripes before you move into a big job. And obviously, Steen had done it with Hibs and Dunfermline. Billy McNeil had obviously went to Aberdeen, I think it was. Yeah, Aberdeen he was at. Even Rangers had done it as well. Like Waddle goes to Kilmarnock, wins a title there. Was there a worry at the time with Greig that he hadn't done that as such?
Absolutely, definitely. And even myself at that age, I was 18, 19 at the time. If you think even Scott Simon too, and Scott Simon plays with us, goes to East Fife, goes into Preston North End. So that was always the way. And I remember at the time when it was announced, the kind of natural, not being disrespectful, but the natural thing would be go on and manage Clyde, go on and manage Hearts or whatever, pick up the experience. And for Big Greig to be thrown into the deep end, I think the other thing too is 1 minute or a couple of weeks before, he's a teammate with him, albeit he's a captain and everyone respects him. But to suddenly have that as well, Scott, and then you're the boss, to me, it just seemed a big mistake. And Greig, knowing the man that he is, he was never going to refuse Rangers. But I certainly felt at the time it's very risky. And I think through time we'll see, I think it was a mistake, because he could have gone, I think, picked up more experience elsewhere, then came back. Other thing that I think could have done is they could have went out more to try and keep Wallace. As I say, we don't know what it was, but the ideal one for me would be to keep Big Wallace and have John Greig then going as an assistant, and then let him, that could have been another route through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more than fair. Greig, obviously, his first season. This is the golden point. This is probably the high point. It doesn't really get as high as this. It's a really bad start in the league. No wins in the first 6 games. But the thing is, obviously, the 2 cups. Rangers do well in cups at this point. They do well in cups under Greig, and even Wallace later on. They win 2 league cups before that kind of revolution in '86. it takes them 3 games to beat Hibs in the final. It takes them
Yeah.
2 replays. It's then a 2-1 win against Aberdeen in a really strong Aberdeen team who are just riding that crest of a wave before they go on to establish themselves. Greig's first season, when you look at it in paper, is probably a League One away from being unbelievable.
Scott, if you think of the European one too,
Yeah.
we played Juventus as well.
Yeah.
We go over there, I think we could beat 1-0. We take them back to Ibrox, the development starting. We beat them. Now, at that time, Juventus, I don't know how many, maybe it's 8 or 9.
Trapattoni's Juventus, yeah.
You know, top quality. I remember going to that one, great atmosphere. And then what we do is we then go to PSV Eindhoven, an average game at Ibrox, but going over there. And at the time, PSV Eindhoven hadn't been beaten in Europe, and I don't know.
Yeah,
you know,
UEFA Cup winners as well at that point.
Aye. And we go over there and we actually beat them over. Obviously, the famous Bobby Russell goal.
Mm-hmm.
So what we had done at Europe too, we then ultimately get, I think it was Cologne.
Cologne in the quarters, yeah.
But what happened as well, winter, the whole winter kicked in. That was obviously after maybe March, which has got an impact to the game's delayed. It was going to be only one day. We play them. We end up having to play with different injuries, but I think Billy Urquhart up front.
Mm-hmm.
We just fall short. But I think that links to the Hibs one as well in the finals, because what happened was at the end of it, if you look at the run of games, these guys had played so many games. They were playing pretty much every 3 or 4 days, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Or as you say, I remember going to Parkhead and we were minutes away. If we'd even get a draw over at Parkhead, it was certainly in our hands. And I think we're 1-0 up, 2-1 down, back to 2 each. Then there was the own goal late on with Big Jackson, and then McLeod scored. It was one of the lowest feelings ever because we were so close from consecutive trebles as well.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at that season as a whole, obviously the 2 cup wins, Juventus under Trapattoni, a massive team, massive team. They go on to dominate as well later on in the 80s. PSV, UEFA Cup winners, hadn't been beaten, as you say. Their first Rangers gave them the first home defeat in European competition. The PSV game finishes in the 1st of November, and the Cologne quarter final is in the March.
Yeah.
It's unheard of, and obviously you speak to Gordon Smith's famous for saying that injury, the injuries deny Rangers getting really, really far in a European Cup. I think that's fair.
I would think at that point in time, that was probably about the best chance that we really had.
I think so. I think so, yeah.
I'm not sure, was that maybe the one Nottingham Forest, but they ended up with, as the teams had went out...
Nottingham Forest and Malmo in the final, I'm pretty sure.
It just seems to be, and it's repeated itself, isn't it? We end up going to major finals without strikers and things, but at that point in time, there was no real, okay, we're disappointed at losing the league at the end to Celtic, but your average Rangers fan, as you say, ticked a few boxes. Big Greig in at the deep end, nearly the treble, and as you say, quarter-finals in the European Cup.
Yeah, I want to learn a bit more about the boardroom at the time. Obviously, it is the definition of a boardroom. There is weekly board meetings and things like that. Like, is there a lot mentioned at the time about what's going on behind the scenes, or is it all just about, like, obviously modern day? We know every penny that goes into the club now. Like, then what was it like?
Your average supporter, to be honest with you, didn't, unless it was something in mainstream media. I can imagine at the time, maybe Scott Simon minded with some stuff, but during that period of time, you didn't get much at all. You knew that kind of Willie Waddle was still kind of up there, but it was pretty much all in the park. And as you say, you read about it later on, it becomes this, was it Tuesday? Big Greig talks about the boardroom. There's a kind of board meetings 3:30 to 9:30 every Tuesday, with maybe about an hour talking about the actual football side. And it just seemed like a kind of committee, to be honest with you, rather than a real professional organisation, that was focused. I think the other one too, in terms of funding, obviously will come down later on, because there was this big tension between obviously the stadium, which the Rangers pools had really helped to, but obviously Didel as well was on the record to say, we don't want to get into any debt as well. So I think there would be tensions. We also have those players who ultimately were playing, some of them had been there maybe from the 70s, some before. So Big Greig still get them. There's a few of them getting to, I think average age was 27 when he took over that team. So again, it didn't really have the chance of maybe kind of cutting some out, bringing new in. And I feel that was one of the problems too, that he ended up maybe playing too long with those guys. And earlier on, there hadn't been a conveyor belt that we used to have in the 60s of youth. So when Big Greg took over as well, on the Monday, he used to actually take the kids who were coming after school. And I think you'll have maybe about 10 of the guys that we all know as Rangers legends and so on. But at that point in time, there was nothing coming through, Scott.
Yeah.
So they were depending too much on these guys who were at a later stage and getting injuries. And
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously 79, 80 is probably as bad as you can get, really. I mean, fifth in the league. But the emergence of the new firm at this point, obviously Dundee United would come later on, but Aberdeen might emerge as a big powerhouse, obviously under Alex Ferguson. Alex Ferguson's a weird one because obviously we'll touch on him later on when he gets a chance to take over from Greig. But could you feel this Aberdeen thing coming? Like, was there anything about this, or was this out the blue? Like, Rangers finished fifth this season, and Aberdeen do establish themselves as the powerhouse at this point.
Even before then, there was a number of young players coming through Aberdeen. Probably the opposite of ours, if you think of, and then you end up with your Leighton McLeish Miller, Eric Blacks, Peter Wears, and Neil Cooper Strachan's and so on. But there was a whole conveyor belt of those guys coming through. At times, Rangers had been kind of stronger than them, but again, they came through. And linking to Dundee United as well, it was the same. Dundee United. Again, it was a case of young guys coming through and then joining the team. It wasn't a case of piecemeal bringing people from left to right. So we didn't see it coming because, as you say, within a couple of years, we were pretty much dominant. And then it came in. And obviously, during that period, I think Aberdeen 3 leagues, 4 Scottish Cups, 2 League Cups, Dundee United League Cups, 2 of them. Again, runners-up, UEFA Cup final, semi-final European Cup, and obviously Aberdeen Cup Winners' Cup, Super Cup. So there's some cracking players in there. And between Jim McLean and Ferguson, really well organised as well. Yeah.
The thing as well, obviously, this season, you look at it and you just think it's a bad Rangers season. We look at it, a third round exit in the League Cup. Scottish Cup, obviously, beating the final to Celtic with a deflected George McCluskey shot.
Yeah.
Was that unfair? Were Rangers unlucky that day?
I thought we had actually done no bad, and then it got there and then the goal. But I thought that day, similar to later on, I think when we play Aberdeen through, and I think we always 1-0 in extra time. But again, Rangers were pretty decent, But at that point, no, certainly during that season, you could see things were beginning to come off. I think the pressure was building on Big Greg, and as well, we're not the most patient anyway, Scott, aren't we?
Yeah, I think
so you've got Celtic obviously doing better than us. It's always a real kind of pain. You've got these other 2 clubs coming through, and then it just increased, the pressure on Rangers. Yeah.
I mean, you're out of Europe as well. Like the last time Rangers would play in the European Cup the season before, it would be 10 years before they would do it again. But a Cup Winners' Cup exit to Valencia, who obviously would go on to win it, so you can see the likes of that. But it's tough because you've said, I've heard you say many times, Greg was your hero. There's that thing, and I think we see it all the time. You're willing to just give him chance after chance, even when you know it's going wrong. I think we see it all the time in football.
And things have changed. We've talked about it in the Dominant series as well, about at that point in time, as much as we're disappointed, but you sort of go and see Rangers, you don't know a lot about what's going behind. You're optimistic to start with, things start coming off. You're then waiting to maybe the Cup, see how it's going, but you keep going. And as you say, there wasn't the same. Nowadays, I think if you remember maybe a couple of years ago, maybe we draw with Livingston, and there's practically it was ridiculous. So although we were disappointed, and obviously because it was the likes of Big Greg, we were prepared to, kind of give him time, and some of the players as well. They're still talking some of the legends from Barcelona and so on. So it's
I mean, you look at the players as you mentioned, like even the next season, McCloy's still there, Sandy Jardine, Tom Forsyth, Colin Jackson, Bobby Russell, Cooper's obviously at the early stages of what he was going to be. Willie Johnson, Derek Johnson. It is still that core. And it's a strange one because Greg would later on he would bring in players, and he would. Is it fair to say he would bring in players not up to Rangers level later on?
I think it would be. I mean, I think there were some, there was some of them that were, but certainly not compared to. And what he should have done really is, if he had been a wee bit more kind of, not brutal, but with some of the players releasing them earlier. But again, I think if he had a better kind of transfer, he could actually have put in some quality and taken out one or two at a time. But what happened was it seemed to just go too far. And as you say, I think by that time, Scott, we were playing catch up, weren't we? With the other three sides. Yeah.
But spending the money as well. Two big signings in the summer of 1980. Jim Bett from Lochran for 150,000. Colin McCallum for Partick Thistle, 165,000. Yes, Rangers are still spending money. Rangers are spending big money at this point.
Yeah, and Jim Bett, to be honest with you, I think he was one of the positives.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he was definitely one of the. I think that John McClelland too, ultimately. But I mean, McClelland, I think we got him relatively cheaply, maybe 60 grand or so. But so there were some good ones in, and ultimately ended up with like Robert Pritz and things. But again, we're not playing that type of football. Even within the grounds too, we tended to do a wee bit better away from home. That whole Ibrox getting developed, that had a wee impact too as well in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
At that time. Yeah.
Do you think that was a big thing as well? Like obviously the stadium things are something that I'm kind of keen to get your thoughts on, because Rangers had a disaster in 71, and it does, Willie Waddle, I mean, I think this is his greatest legacy at Rangers. He does immediately stand up and say, we need to modernise this ground, we need to make sure this doesn't happen again. And when he's doing that, he's so far ahead of what the real realisation is, because 10 years after this, I mean, clubs are trying to get up to grips with the Taylor report, and Rangers are already far ahead. And that is the kind of forward thinking that was at Rangers at this point. It was small, but that's a big thing from Waddle to obviously implement that. And obviously the circumstances meant they had to, but it's building for the future.
And I think it was more the determination of Waddle, obviously, what had been through, as opposed to some of the directors and the, that's the thing. I don't think it was some kind of major strategic, as you say. I think because of what happened, and he went on there and he was so determined to do it. I think the only trick we did miss is potentially we could have looked for more funding, and as I say, made some of the changes earlier, Scott, into Greig's, rather than suddenly waiting till later on. And as I say, ultimately, I think even when we'll get into Wallace, but even the end when Wallace comes back, there's a lot of people that Greig's brought through, which ultimately Souness will end up benefiting from. But there was definitely that period, I think, in Rangers' history where we took our eye, off of kind of bringing people through.
Yeah. 80 and 81, things do improve. There is an improvement, a Scottish Cup win. I'll get your thoughts on that in a minute. But the third place, 12 points behind Celtic, but it's still progression on the season before. The League Cup, weird defeat to Aberdeen. I've seen this back. Aberdeen get 2 penalties that are even now are no penalties. But there is that progression, and I think, as you say, when you're saying about Greig, obviously you're willing to give him the time, and that bit of progression, I think, did help. And then obviously a trophy at the end of it, a 4-1 final replay against Dundee United after a really tedious 0-0 final in the first game. But John McDonald with a double, David Cooper, Bobby Russell, that cup eased the pressure in Greig at that point, do you think?
Again, I think so, yeah. I think Ian Redford missed the penalty, didn't he?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And then obviously we played the replay, but yeah, it did. It's funny what you say. At that point in time, we just went to Hampden, semi-finals and finals, and typically won, didn't we?
Yeah.
That was probably getting towards the end of it, apart from the League Cups. But no, you're right. Again, it gave him another one. I think even when he did go at the end, the majority of Rangers fans, as much as it became, we do need a change either, but because there's such a fondness for John Greig, do you know what I mean? It's like one of your family, and you knew that it wasn't for the want of trying. But yeah, as you say, that gave us a wee bit of a lift anyway, doesn't it?
Obviously, we mentioned it about it's perceived at the time, obviously, a lack of ambition for the club due to the transfer funds, but it has been directed towards the redevelopment. But is there that not disdain towards the fans at this point? But like, is it a case of that the board are at the time in-house, keep it quiet, as opposed to like let the fans know that this is for the greater good, this redeveloping this ground? Do you think there is do you think the board have the? It's 1980. It's not modern day. Like, what's the kind of board and the fans relationship like at this point?
Nothing like it is now. I think now the way it's got, you need the three in sync, don't you? You need the team, you need the fans, and you need the board, and everyone needs to be in unison. At that point in time, I don't think it would be unfair to say, but it was a case of these guys will sort of come anyway. There wasn't any really kind of proactive go out there and say, listen, you're going to have to give us a time. This is part of a kind of longer, plan that we have. They would do the odd go out and maybe speak to various supporters and so on, but there wasn't that kind of same, I don't know, the kind of communications department and so on, and getting messages out. And I think that hence that the reason as well, attendances would just go down then, wouldn't they? Because guys would just vote with their feet really and go, that's us out to this one now. And you could see the crowds to start off with in seasons, maybe start 20,000 odd and so on. They could go up and go up. Old Firm games would be pretty full anyway. Maybe some of the bigger ones, Hearts and so on. But you could see it, Scott, that people in the end, they would just drift away. And it was getting to the stage where especially with the seated stadium as well, and you were just seeing these various empty, sometimes you get sub 20,000s, didn't you? And I think I remember at one point me ultimately going to games where there was like 8,000 and 9,000 at home.
There's 4 home games in a row here between 81 and 82 from December to the 19th of December, 81, Rangers home at Dundee, 2-1 win, 11,000 fans. 9th of January 1982, a 1-0 win against Celtic, the bet penalty, 44,000. A Dundee United 2-0 win a week later, 23,000. And then Hibs a week later, 2 weeks after that, 20,000. You've just got that. It's that mixture. It's
and because we didn't. It wasn't a case of season tickets. Then I think I said when Soonest came, we hit 6,000. That was the record we'd ever had. But most people, you just went on your supporters bus. You went there. There was no problem in terms of getting tickets. Same with away games too. So as you say, one part of the season you would go, the bus was full. People were getting turned away, and then as you say, at points later on, it was like a pick a seat, any seat.
Yeah, I mean, you've got John Payton later on, the Rangers chairman, betting what the attendance is going to be. I mean, it's unheard of now. Like, it's even now for like a friendly, you would get double that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's unbelievable. But 81, 82 is that. This is the kind of the time this is the time where is there going to be that progression under Greig? It's another third place finish. There is a League Cup win, the Scottish Cup final in 1982. I want to get your thoughts on, because Rangers play Aberdeen, the lead for the majority of the match, and Aberdeen just turn it on and it finishes 4-1. And it's what happens there, 3 goals in extra time and Aberdeen just steamroll Rangers.
And I think it kind of knocked the stuffing out of me, to be honest with you, even getting into that summer holidays in it. As you say, it was. I mean, we were doing no bad, and then at the end, some of the goals, it was embarrassing, wasn't it? In the end, so I think even people like me, who was like, it's John Greig, it was really beginning to hit home now that we need to do something about this one, because they just seemed to be getting better as well, didn't they? Which made things worse.
And is it that in the boardroom as well? Is it like we don't want Greig to fail. We don't want this to happen. Is that in the boardroom as well at this point? Is there that thing of we've promoted Greig, he's obviously the club legend, he is the greatest ever Ranger. I think that's absolutely fair. But is there that stubbornness to not progress and realise that they need to move forward?
I really don't know. I know very near the end of his tenure as well, Greig actually went to them and had said to them, look, this is all. I mean, he was going through a lot of problems stress-wise and everything. He said it was just taking. So, I mean, he was having to, this is another ridiculous thing, he was having to negotiate with agents to do with Jim Watt's boxing match and deal with HR matters. And that in itself just showed almost kind of amateurish, in terms of putting him in here and asking him to do that. But I remember reading as well that Greig went to them and said to them, look, this is all just getting too much. He'd moved from Edinburgh over to Glasgow, but it still wasn't. But again, their attitude was, we're not going to make that decision. Willie Waddle's on holiday. The rest of us won't. You'll just need to keep going. And here's the cracker, Scott. So what we'll do is we'll just look at you from week to week and we'll decide how things are. Now, that in itself, to the greatest ever Rangers, had given all that service from the early 60s, And I think in the end of it, that's where obviously it comes, it gets away. So that, I think that gives you a wee kind of mirror into, the kind of wee glass into their views anyway.
Yeah.
It's just a bit unfortunate as well that obviously Waddle, was kind of further down as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's all changing. I mean, we'll touch in 84 when it does all change in the boardroom. And
Aye.
But at this point, they are still backing Greig. They're giving him money. Craig Patterson from Hibs, that's a massive signing, like £200,000. There is this thing of bringing players in from the Scottish leagues. I mean, even 5 years later, that doesn't happen. It's keep the players that you think are. And we see it a year later. I know he comes from Sunderland, but Ali McCoist, he's proves to be one of the greatest signings.
And we tried to get him before. Yeah, that's right.
But there still is this kind of keep a Scottish core. Like, is it time to modernise? At this point, Pritz is obviously a foreigner. Is it the time to start looking into the continental market? Like we would see at this point. We would see this point. Like English clubs were in to adopt.
I think they could also have looked as well at taking some of the pressure off of Greig, and what else could we do? Could we bring someone else in, to help there and so on? But I don't know. It just seemed to be building kind of on him, at that point, and it seemed piecemeal. That was the only thing I felt with kind of some of the signings as well. There wasn't, nowadays I've got a certain way. You can imagine the director of football were looking for this or that. Sometimes it became a who played well against us, or at that point in time, or this guy's up for grabs, we'll put him in. At times as well, maybe bring him in one position and then in playing him elsewhere. So
yeah, the 83-84, this turns out to be the last few months of the Greig era, but it starts badly the season, 1 point from 4 league games, but it's the first 6 League Cup games turn out to be really good for Greig. But it's the Cup Winners' Cup run, win the second round, a 2-1 win over Porto, who go on and win the European Cup a few years later. They turn out to be a big team. But was there something brewing, do you think? Was it just a realisation in Greig that this isn't working anymore?
I think more in Greig rather than us, to be honest with you. It's funny you say that as well about Porto and Valencia and all these teams. And I always remember when you get knocked out, you go, Rangers, we shouldn't have beaten by Valencia. And as you say, they go on. And then Porto as well, for goodness sake, it's... Yeah. But that just seemed to be the time, didn't it? But it's just, I think within the Greig, at that point in time, it was, I don't know, I think it was enough's enough, really. Yeah.
I mean, first 9 games and 7 points from 18, and in the end, I don't want to say the pressure gets too much for him. I don't think that's fair. I think it's just I think it's admirable from Greig because obviously following his career, John Greig does not want to admit that he's failed.
Nope. And absolutely. I mean, even if you saw him as a player as well, just the drive. I mean, he was pulling people up, driving them on. I think there was one semi-final. I remember him playing against Hibs around about the time of the Cup Winners' Cup. And I think he'd done something in one of his bone, in his foot, and it was Wallace was wanting to come off, but no, Big Greig was playing. I mean, it was ridiculous, but that just typified, and even you'll see through the Barca stuff as well, the guy was playing with injuries and Lord knows what, Scott. So put it this way, you could never ever have said maybe didn't he apply himself enough or so on. If anything, probably rather than putting his hands up earlier, he just kept kind of going. And unfortunately too, I think it had a wee bit of a negativity on people's perception of John Greig.
Do you think that's changed over? Do you think that has changed over the years? Like, do you think you do think of the player before the manager? No,
I think so. Yeah, I think most of us as well didn't. It's not in a case of we didn't think he was a good manager. We just felt that he was put in way, too early and didn't have the experience. Some of the early stuff, as you said, with Europe as well, and he did win the odd trophy and so on. So it wasn't the worst at all, but we feel more as if it was actually a shame, doing that to him. Yeah.
I think that's right. I think that's fair. I think it is a shame.
I mean, you imagine it. Imagine Jock Wallace with him, with Big Greig as assistant for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And then suddenly Big Jock goes away elsewhere. Could have been totally different.
Yeah, absolutely, totally different. Even going and not learning the trade, but learning the manager, learning how to be a manager. Because you know as well as I do, going into that goldfish bowl in your first job, there's no protection. You've not got that like if what I think that Waddle obviously wins a European Cup Winners' Cup, but we look back, his league record isn't that good.
Even and against Celtic and so on as well. Look, people talk about Wallace and Waddle. Wallace's record was far better.
Yeah. But I think what saved Waddle was he'd won the league elsewhere. He'd won the league before he came to Rangers as manager. He's got that in his locker kind of thing. Like, even Steen had a lot of Steen had a brilliant record at Hibs and Fairland. Doesn't win much, but still has that. I've done this before.
And Scott Simon did have a decent record against him. Jock Wallace had Steen's number. You know, to be honest with you, they actually, when you find out when Greig comes in, then they bring Billy McNeil in pretty much the same month.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, if Big Wallace had still been there, they would not have brought Big McNeil in at that point in time, because at that point in time he had them, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. But the Greig obviously resigns as manager on the 28th of October 1983, and Tommy McLean goes in as caretaker for a few weeks until a permanent manager's brought in. And at the time, what's the speculation like? Like, we'll touch on a couple of people who turned it down, but who are the names flying about at the time as the speculation?
Was very much Ferguson, really, and McLean. I think it was Billy Bingham, maybe later when Wallace came back, you know. But I certainly Ferguson, McLean, maybe Billy Bingham as well. Yeah.
Alex Ferguson we'll touch on first, obviously doing brilliant at Aberdeen, had that Rangers background. Kind of reports since have suggested that it was something other than wanting to stay at Aberdeen and continue to build there. What do you think of Ferguson? Like, because different books you read and there's different stories. What do you think? Why do you think Alex Ferguson doesn't take that job in 1983?
Oh, well, probably the first thing for me is I would have liked him to have taken it, obviously, because of what he had done and because he was an ex-Rangers player. Yeah. You know, although things have come out later on, but to me, that would have been a great one for us with his experience anyway. Why he didn't take it, some things later on, I think, was he a wee bit miffed the first time, supposedly, you know, that they never actually approached him the first time.
Yeah.
I don't know. Other one too is I think Man United seemed to be on the horizon as well, and it would look as if he actually signed a new deal, didn't he? With Aberdeen as well. It was a 5-year contract or something, but maybe 60 grand or something like that. So I don't even know whether he then used that. And as you say, there's been some stuff in books about, you know, things that happened when he was there as a player and so on. So, but to be honest with you, if we'd had him at the time, Scott, I actually think he would have done okay. I know some of my colleagues beg to differ, but yeah.
But see, with obviously Ferguson, we know what he goes on to do, and he's, in my opinion, he's the greatest manager that's walked the earth. But how different is football, and how different is the Rangers revolution that we'll go on and talk about with Souness? Because it does result as that bringing in somebody who's not had a background with the club. It is that kind of kickstart this new era of the club. Do you think it's different under Ferguson if he comes in then?
I think it is. I think if Ferguson had came to us, I do think it would have pushed us on. Potentially would have brought some of the guys from Aberdeen as well. Ferguson being the kind of character that he is as well, he would probably have made more demands on this board or committee or whatever they were at the time.
Yeah.
You know, to make sure that he got his, because ultimately did that with Man United too, didn't he? Whereas again, Big Greig was in there, really wanted to do well. So no, I think it would have worked. You know, at that point in time, yeah. Again, his assistant as well, you know, with Archie too, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Jim McLean's another one. Jim McLean's obviously coming off a League One with the United. We kind of think of Jim McLean now as this really old-fashioned, the 10-year contracts thing, painting the bridges and all that. But we look at Jim McLean as different, but first things first, he is a proper football manager.
See, with the lack of resources that he had compared to, obviously, the old firm, he'd done so well, and he brought in so many young players. They played some really good football. Sometimes we tended to have their number in terms of finals and things, but when you think of what he did, and ultimately you'll see it as well with getting to UEFA Cup final and the European Cup one too, to be honest with you, that was pretty dodgy. He's obviously got Walter Smith over there with him too. But again, Jim McLean or Ferguson, I would have taken him because he'd shown. I think the other thing too, European-wise, tactically and all that too, I think, because, you know, Rangers would play one way and then you would go abroad, and we didn't. It was ultimately we managed to do that, but I think McLean would have felt it that way too in terms of counter-attacking and different styles of play. And
yeah, I think as well, when you like people will be listening to this show and will be thinking, what the Aberdeen and the United manager turning down the Rangers job is crazy, but they were ahead of Rangers at this point.
Yeah.
And it's funny, but obviously you mentioned there about McLean, and I think McLean would have been ideal for this situation. I think he would have. I still think you get the kind of the revolution. I think that all still happens, but out of the blue, Jock Wallace emerges. He's at Motherwell. He's at Motherwell at this
that's
point.
right.
Surely at this point, there's when Jock Wallace is mentioned to be coming back, there's this thing of why is he coming back after he's left in such weird circumstances?
I think my heart, rolled my head at that again because of my fondness.
I think that's it.
And that was probably, I don't mean an easy sell to Rangers fans, but that was the one that certainly because of what he had done before. He'd done no bad at Leicester. He did eventually get them promoted. He stayed up for a season, back down again. Obviously, Motherwell. I think even his first game against us with Motherwell, didn't he? Motherwell were scunnered him because he walked out to the acclaim of the Rangers fans, didn't he? So I'm coming back. So I think at the time my heart was going, Big Jock's back, but and it was amazing, the atmosphere. I remember going up to Pittodrie. I think it was the first game. We got beat 3-0 up there. And geez, it was like the prodigal son coming back. The big man up there in the rain.
Yeah.
And to give him his due, we went on a pretty good run after them.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know if it's 15 or 17 games unbeaten, but we went on quite so he did turn it around a wee bit, and he did get them playing more. It was even, I think the first time was at the Black and Red Sox up there. And I always remember him saying, as we might not play like the Rangers, but we're going to look like the Rangers. And then obviously, Big Jock stamped his own thing on it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, obviously, as well, is morale and fitness is the big thing that comes in and improves. That's this. I know we talk about the kind of sand dunes and things like that with Wallace, but he came in and immediately just improves things. He just steadies the ship, and it's what Rangers needed at that point. I'm not disagreeing, but he makes that positive impact, and I think that's a big thing for the next couple of years. I think as you say, your dad's back. I think that's what the fans feel.
He also had this. I mean, Big Greig was a leader in terms of footballer, but even if you read the stuff to do with Leicester and so on, but they loved him because he was honest. Mm-hmm. As long as you work hard for him, fine. If you don't, he'll not miss you and hit the wall. But people knew where they were, and they would all run through. So it was really good in terms of this whole leadership and motivational side and so on. The big man was pretty good, and as you're saying, certainly in those kind of maybe year, 2 years, he was doing okay.
Mm-hmm. And he ends the season with a trophy, a League Cup win. This is one of the best Old Firm Cup finals I think you can find. Rangers 3, Celtic 2. Ali McCoy's with a hat-trick. It includes a 104th extra time penalty. What's your memories of that game? Surely that's one of the highlights for you and your time following Rangers.
It was, I think, what would that be, 22 or something like that. So I remember the Saturday night we were out. It was a Sunday, I think it would be, and then with Hampden and going to it. Just the absolutely brilliant atmosphere. I think the thing that did it for me was, I think Sandy Clark, we done okay, didn't it? It was a kind of ball through the middle. But I remember the penalty at the end that won it, obviously Big Roy Aitken into McCoy's. But I remember the one that won it, Scott, me doing, I'm a kind of half glass empty guy.
Yeah.
Turning back, not looking at the park, looking up at the Rangers end, as my mate tells me, Ali's running up, he's running up. And as he hit it, there was as if he's missed it. And then suddenly everything went. So, but it was great. I don't know, was Bobby Russell playing? We actually played some pretty good football as well. Mm. It could have been more. I think they equalised right near the end, didn't they? And, they took it to extra time.
89th minute penalty from Mark Reed.
But to me, that was great. That was his battle fever one as well.
Yes, that was a battle fever one, and I think that got Wallace through the second time. It was that thing of we're still Rangers. We're not at the top. We're not where we should be, but we are. We've still got that battle fever.
And we could do it, and you'll see it further on as well. We weren't consistent enough.
Mm-hmm. No.
But when it came to those there was some big Old Firm games and so on that you could do it. Other thing that jumps out on this one too is, if you can remember, was it a week or so before McCoy's with the Dundee one? where he was obviously getting a bit of abuse for the Rangers fans and so on. But he ends up, Big Wallace puts him into that game, and they were saying, well, you're not questioning whether you should have or shouldn't have. And he went, no, because that's what Ali's like. He's got strong character and so on. And so again, the psychology as well of him doing that, because McCoy would be thinking, that's it, he's leaving me out. And I think he reaped the rewards from that too.
Yeah. And going into 84, 85, where it does start the same way as it ends, like the season before, it does continue the strong form. They sit at Christmas third, just in touch and distance of Celtic. But New Year's Day, that defeat to Celtic in New Year's Day, and it just goes really downhill from there, doesn't it?
Is that the 2-1 one, I think?
Yes, I'm sure it is, yeah. Let me just double check. It's the 2-1 at Ibrox. Cooper scores in Celtic. I think, does Johnson score that game, if I'm right?
He did, and I remember giving him pelters as well when the game's broken up and the usual, and he was in front of us, and he just showed his class, because it was just one chance, and it's a 2-1, and then from then you just kind of felt it then, didn't you? I'm not sure, was it in February that time then, the kind of 86 one then that David Holmes is in after it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll go on to that in a few minutes. Obviously, at this point, the chairmanship's changed. Ray Simpson's out and John Payton's in. Was there a big deal made of that at the time? Like this was perceived to be the kind of new time, and we get into 85. We'll touch on the kind of turmoil in 85, but was that seen as a big thing when John Payton comes in?
No, not really, to be honest with you. It was just another one of those kind of, I think it was like Gillespie, and there was Robinson, there was kind of various kind of garage guys and businessmen and so on, but no, nothing really on that side of it.
Yeah, but obviously a League Cup one as well, another League Cup, a 1-0 goal from Ian Ferguson against Dundee United for the second League Cup. It was then called the Skull Cup, which Rangers were going to dominate for the next few years. But was that enough? Was Rangers fans having the same feeling with Wallace as they were early days with Greig, that he'll get it right?
No, I don't. I mean, it was good winning the cup, but again, we just knew there was so much more to go. I think then there were mumblings of behind the scenes as well, as you say, that something massively needs to change. Because although we did the odd cup final and so on and won the odd shiny thing, but you could tell, couldn't you? And we could raise it in the odd game, but we couldn't really go and run Scott, so I think at that point in time, again, I think that feeling was, something's going to happen. Again, thankfully, because it was Big Jock, we give him more time and so on. But for him too, personally, I think he was struggling too, wasn't he? The Parkinson's disease stuff as well.
I think that,
he said that too. And some of the players as well from previously said he wasn't the same guy. He never had that same kind of fight and so on in him, But again, he's not going to give up. He's just going to keep going.
He's that Rangers man we talk about. He's, as you say, he's not going to give up, even when he knows it's probably an impossible task. He's not going to give up until eventually the club kind of do change with the times. But we'll go off the park just a minute. Obviously, the turmoil of 85, crowds are down to 17,000, but something big happens. Jack Gillespie sells his shares to Lawrence Marlborough. How big a turning point is that in the club's history?
That is definitely a big one then, isn't it? Once he's got that one, and then ultimately David Holmes is put in. I think he'd been involved in stuff to do with the stadium and so on as well. But when he went in there, it suddenly, I don't know, it put it up umpteen different notches, because you then had a guy in, rather than this kind of committee who they didn't seem to really know what way they were going. And you suddenly had a guy in there doing this kind of business. Where are we going to? How are we going to get there? What do we have to do? Are we on track and so on? And from then on, it just had a feeling as if, and the good thing as well is I think Lawrence Marlborough as well, ultimately he was hands off anyway, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So it was David Holmes himself, And I think he's very certainly when anything I pick up, I think he's very underrated.
I was going to ask you that.
What he did for us.
Yeah. I mean, he obviously kickstarts the next chapter in this journey, but he comes in round about this time and he is something different. He's not had that Rangers background. I think he comes from the Lawrence Group. He's a Lawrence Group employee, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and Rangers do need that. Rangers at this point, that is we talk about the signing culture and things like that. Rangers are a club that need to move into a different stratosphere at this point. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that even commercially as well.
Yes.
There's next to nothing getting done commercially. And the other thing we never touched on as well is I think some of the players were like 120 quid a week and 90 quid during the, So again, all of that, they really had to move with the times because football was changing, do you know what I mean, really all over the place in terms of, I don't know, the relationship between players and clubs and so on. And then obviously, as you'll get into it in the future, there's a number of kind of major things that will happen to, with the likes of Heysel and so on.
Yeah.
Obviously the kind of European football and stuff that will work to our advantage.
Yeah.
To me, David Holmes definitely, people talk obviously about Dave King and so on, but I actually put David Holmes up there, and then kind of having the vision, then ultimately to, bring in the manager and totally change, as you say, revolution.
Yeah, and it is that revolution. We'll touch on we will touch on the big appointment that comes later on in that summer, but an infamous game I want to touch on with you, because this is a game that always fascinates me. Celtic are in 4th, Rangers are in 5th, and there's a 4-4 draw in the 22nd of March. Is it fair to say that this is the kind of last time, the last straw for Wallace kind of thing, that this is the...
Aye, I think so. I think we'd done a 3-0, didn't we, in the November before, where we played them off the park. We had signed Mark McGee and some of the Rangers young. See, this is the thing now. Some of the Rangers kind of young players were coming through, Gerrard, Ferguson and so on. But you're right, this kind of 4-4 ridiculous game, at the end of it. I think that was a classic with the McCoist celebration, wasn't it? With his boot.
Yeah, that's
one
right,
of the goals he scored, and was it Murdo McLeod or somebody scored?
Murdo scores to make it 4 each, but it's Celtic going to win the league as well, which I find crazy because there's not a lot between Celtic and Rangers at that point. But Celtic are about to go into the really bad time of the 90s that they're about to go through. But Rangers so far behind just that level where they should be, and where the money they've spent as well, where they are spending bigger, outspending most clubs in the country at this point. It's what is happening? Like how are they still in fifth? I mean, Rangers finishing fifth is unfathomable to me.
I just think the level of players that they had, to be honest with you, some of the ones they signed, as you say, you can spend money on them, but you'll find out that the ones that will stay will be obviously the Ian Durrants, the Derek Fergusons, you've got your McCoys and so on. I mean, Ted McMinn obviously stayed for a wee bit, didn't he? But you've got some of those kind of earlier, the kind of Rangers players will stay on. I just think it was kind of poor decisions, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but obviously Jock Wallace is dismissed in the beginning of April. Is there whispers about who's taking over? When do you first hear the name Graham Souness?
I think it must just have been mainstream media for me, because there was none of this, obviously, the social media side of it. I think it was just mainstream media, whether it be the newspapers or TV. But when it came, it was like, geez, we've got the Scotland captain, haven't we? We've got a guy who's won European Cups with Liverpool over at Sampdoria. Even as a player, Scott, I was excited to be we've got this guy actually playing.
Yeah.
Obviously he'll turn in player manager. But no, just the excitement of that in itself. And then ultimately when Walter Smith, was announced, to me that was the good one, because we talk about the John Greig one that it didn't really have. But Walter Smith had been up there with Jim McLean, all that experience and so on. Obviously knew Scottish football and knew the club. That's another biggie for me, because I think if Graham Souness had come in with his character as well and so on, I think it was ideal, the two of them. And I think Walter had he thought he was going to get it before, didn't he, when Jim McLean...
Yeah, I think, absolutely.
On Sunday, I think Jim McLean was like, yep, and then he would phone them back, and Smith thought, this is it. And obviously it came, after that one,
But we'll touch, obviously, on the Souness revolution next week, but how big was the need for that change? How big was that decision going to just shock Scottish football the way it did?
It was massive. I mean, obviously there's other kind of micro things to it. It's shocking, not just Scottish football, but British football as well. In terms of Rangers and ultimately, but no, it was needed so much, because I mean, you see the crowds going down and so on, and as much we were like, that's okay, but we really needed to get back up to the level that we should have been.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's unfortunate because I think a lot of it came from really the board decisions. You know, maybe with a couple of different moves from left to right, things could have been so much different, you know, and it was a lot of pain. Fortunately, you'll now get on to some of the better, you know.
Yeah, but like looking back before we kind of wrap up, and you know, well, the overall legacy of that kind of 78 to 86 period, it is just bad decisions on the park and off the park.
I think so. Yes, yeah. I think that's all it is. It's I think even prior to that, when something happened before that, we didn't have a pool of young players to bring in.
Yeah.
As I say, you end up with Scott Nisbet, David McPherson, Derek Ferguson, Ian Gerrard, and so on. These ones, they ultimately start coming through. But again, if we'd had that probably middle of the 70s, what happened is we tended to just kind of stick with, as you said, maybe I reckon maybe 8 out of the 11. The guys had been playing probably since 1970 or thereabouts, and we just tried too much in that period of time. Took our eye off the fact that we need to continually, you know, can improve and have this, you know, the kind of next circle coming through. So, but I think the flexibility as well. I think we should have had a better wage structure from early on too. It was ridiculous because we probably could have got some of those others from, you know, Aberdeen and United and so on. And as I say, it's just a shame that with the likes of John Greig, if we hadn't have maybe done a Wallace with him or put someone else in at the time, Scott.
Yeah, definitely. But in the next episode of the Rangers journey, we will look at that Souness shift. That's when Graham Souness comes in and just he hits Scottish football like a whirlwind, changes Rangers completely on and off the park with that immediate summer of 86, and there's just so much to get through in those 3 years before we look at what happens when Murray takes over. But for the first episode of the Rangers journey, I want to thank Alan Bradley for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure to go through that time with you.
No, I really appreciate it. I don't know if it was a pleasure for me, Scott, just bringing back some of those memories. But no, hopefully I've helped to add value as well, mate, and explain some of them.
Yeah, it was thoroughly enjoyable. And thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in. And please follow us for the future episodes of the Rangers journey. Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.